Ideally things run smoothly between, yourselves and occupational therapists or housing associations, but obviously they don't always do that, as I'm sure everyone knows, and things like funding as well. So we're open to any sorts of queries like that, and informally advocating on your behalf, or if there's like a breakdown in communication between yourselves and a professional, we can sometimes step in or perhaps just advise you on what the next step is. So just a varied kind of thing of that. And I also if anybody ever wants them, I've got some here for you leaflets, just general kind of explanations of what the care and support team does at MD UK for people with muscle wasting conditions. And that's about, obviously Duchenne is one of those, but there's also like 60 other ones. I've got one of those, so that's where my interest kind of in muscle wasting conditions comes from, and that's why I'm working at MD UK. So yes, that's kind of my introduction, but also we have a very useful, which I don't have with me unfortunately, a very useful adaptations manual, which is like a fat folder. It's a big thing with general guidelines or tips put together by specialist occupational therapists with knowledge about muscle wasting conditions, things like Duchenne, and it breaks down each room of the house, which is quite useful and gives you measurements or things to kind of expect. So that's a very good document, which I'm sorry to not bring with me. But if anybody likes the idea of that, you could search on our website, just put MD UK Adaptations Manual. It will come up there, or I've got some business cards if anybody wants to email me about anything. So, yeah.
My name's Claire Bosenket, and I'm fortunate to have two young men with Duchenne. So I've got Jack, who's 22, currently at university doing a PhD, and then opposite end I've got Tom, who's complicated with learning, but he's currently studying media and music at college. And I'll leave it there, and then I'll tell you about my housing journey.
I'm Simon Dadd. I'm a trustee of Action Duchenne. I'm also a parent of two boys with Duchenne, not the same two. Tom, who is 17 and is currently doing a games design course at college, and Ben, who is, how old is he? I should know this. He's 9. He has some learning issues and is in a special school. Both are full-time wheelchair users.
Cool. I'm Alex, in case I haven't bumped into any of you yet. I'll work for Action Duchenne. I'm the outreach officer. It's my job to kind of work with people that are new into the charity or newly diagnosed, and also the professionals that come along with that. Would that be local government, the NHS, schools, anything like that. But kind of sort of similar to yourself, just on that front line, queries that come in. So with that being said, does anyone want to start it off? Has anyone got any queries about that sort of housing or adaptations?
My first question is, when should we start looking at it?
If I give you an overview of my journey, and my top tip is to start early, okay? So my eldest son was diagnosed in April 2003. By Christmas 2004, we'd established the house that we were in wasn't suitable for adaptation. So we were in the fortunate position, we lived in privately owned, so we moved in Christmas 2004 to a 2-bed bungalow. We had wardrobes in the corridor, all sorts of things. We actually made provisional drawings before we finalised purchasing the bungalow to make sure that they would be passed through planning. We had quite an understanding person that we were buying it off. So we moved in Christmas 2004. Then we obviously started the process with social services, OTs, looking at adapting the house, drawing plans. We did have a copy of the adaptations manual, and within that they had a list of architects that had had probably a workshop or half-day training on neuromuscular conditions. So we actually ran with one of those architects. And I would say they helped because they'd got experience of working with neuromuscular conditions and disability. I wouldn't necessarily say that you have to go the full way with that. I think if you've got a builder that has got experience in doing disability builds and has been recommended, etc., I think you can run with it that way. Our architect did do a little bit of project management, because I won't say it didn't go straightforward like most building work. Yeah, don't mention the word plumber to me. So we moved in 2004, the first phase of the build, and we put 2 bedrooms and a shared ensuite for my sons, and we put stairs up into the loft and blocked them off, and that was in 2007. Then we had a bit of a break, not just emotionally but financially, and then the second phase of the build was in about 2009-10, when the boys were also on a clinical drugs trial at Great Ormond Street. At that time we looked at the access into the property, the internal access, and we had funding to extend the living room, because by the time we got 2 wheelchairs in and a TV, that was it. And then we contributed to extending the kitchen dining area. So all told, from moving house in 2004, we finished all the major building work in 2011. And I would say that you need to do your research, think about what equipment needs to go in. Don't just take local authority trying to get us to have a lifting platform at the front of the house for access. And I basically challenged it and said, well, why would you put a piece of electric equipment in that needs service and maintaining? What happens if it doesn't work? So we've actually got a ramp at the front. Yes, it's quite substantial, but it works. It doesn't need any maintenance other than cleaning. So you need to start early. During the course of our journey, I've been criticised for making it future-proof. So things like, you need to think long-term. You often find when therapists come in, they just look short-term. We all need to plan. You've seen all the young men driving around in their chairs. You need to plan for longer term. Some of the things that we've done, you don't necessarily need an up-down sink in the bathroom. We've ended up with a standard barrier-free sink. So there's things like, my sons are permanent wheelchair users. Tom can't brush his teeth anymore, but he can park under the sink, and obviously you can help him. And you'll get people saying to you, preserving the function, but obviously long term they're going to need help with all of those tasks. I'll leave it there for a minute and then...
Yeah, my experience is slightly different in that we've not had to do significant building to the structure of our house because we were fortunate enough to have a property that could be adapted. So standard 2-storey building. First thing we had put in was a 3-floor lift, which meant we lost a bedroom, but we had 5. Now we've got 3 now because one of them I use as an office. If you're fortunate enough to have that space, fine. That was grant funded. That was 11,000 quid about 5 or 6 years ago. It's great up until the point they go wrong, and when it broke recently, that cost me about 1,500 quid to put right. The problem is they'll give you the equipment, but then once you've got it, that's your problem to then look after it and make sure it stays working. And then unless it's beyond economic repair, you don't get much help unless you qualify through your means. Subsequently, we've had a ceiling hoist put in one room. We're about to start thinking about bidding for one in another bedrooms. I hope that's our dinner. We also had a wet room put in. What I would say about that is that the council's contractors are very varied in the quality and their trustworthiness, and unfortunately we got someone who was a bit of a cowboy, which we didn't realise until we were subsequently having other building work done, and those builders uncovered what they'd done, and it was a complete and utter mess. And at which point the council who had organised it all weren't seen for dust, because the contract you have is with the builder, not with the council. It's your problem. They don't tell you, of course, that you can go and get your own quotes and your own builders, which is certainly what I would do in future. So I'm not saying that all council builders are bad. So most of the people we've had have been great, but that one, yeah, criminal, frankly, the standard of the work. And cost us a fair bit to put right. And frankly, I'd like to rip it out, but I can't afford to. Like Claire says, some things you'll be offered, you don't need. We haven't got a rise full sink. My son brushed their teeth in bed as it happens and spit into a bowl. It's whatever works for you. If you want a rise full sink, then get one. But if you don't need one, then don't be forced into having one. Wet room, though, I would say is definitely something worth thinking about. Once they can no longer weight bear, getting them in and out of baths is very tricky unless you can put a hoist in and have a raising bath, and they cost a fortune and you're unlikely to get that funded. We tried.
I know somebody who's in their 20s with Duchenne, and originally their parents decided to put a bath in. That's been ripped out now, and it's a shower. My son's, like Simon's, Access Rainbows Hospice. Yeah. So I always say, when you go there, either go in the pool or go and have a soak in the bath, because obviously they've only got a shower at home. Practically, we find it easier to have a shower. In my son's room, we've got a plinth in there, so we've almost got a designated dry bit to get him dried, and the wet bit. And then with regards to things like a ceiling track hoist, so things need to be done like the joists in the ceiling, so they obviously have got to be ready to take the weight of that. So if you're doing a new build, and currently if you come in my bathroom, instead of having a straight track, we've ended up with a bit of a curve because we went with another ceiling track provider and the light fittings were put in the wrong place. So things like that will happen. The other things to say is just you have to be really proactive. From a financial point of view, when I started the journey, we were means tested and we basically weren't going to get anything. Now you can access something called the Disabled Facilities Grant, but don't get too excited. It's only £30,000 currently.
Depends where you are.
Yeah.
It's a devolved thing, so if you don't live in England, it will be different.
Yeah, but there is access on top of that to top up amounts of money, and it does vary across the country. So, for example, when I started the journey, I kind of broke the mould for our authority with having two, because they tried to argue, you've got two, it's one grant. So we kind of said, no, it's not, okay, they've got Duchenne, very different needs. Almost arguing they could share a room. Well, clearly, if you see them now, no, definitely they can't share a room. My other top tips is you can never overdo electric sockets. Because we now, if you go in Tom's room, we've got a hospital bed, we've got a turning device using electrics, we've got a ventilator, we've got a cough assist, we've got a wheelchair that's charging overnight. So you will have lots of electric equipment later on. The Disabled Facilities Grant will look at the space for that disabled person. So it will either be the bedroom, the bathroom. It will not take into account things like space for a carer, which we put on our drawings, which is why we went into the loft. But it will take into consideration the space that you need for the equipment, but not for you to store it or charge it. Yeah. And you can imagine later on, it's big kit that you've got in the house. My other top tip would be, if you can, we have underfloor heating, so that maximises the space in the room, so you've got no radiators or anything. And currently, in the current climate, with bills going through the roof, it means that the boys' end is warm, and we can kind of go without at the other end if necessary.
Just to sound sort of like when I don't think there's ever a wrong time to move into the perfect home that's got the space and that's got the availability. So in terms of looking for the future, it might well be something that you want to keep half an eye on. But there's a massive range in how Duchenne progresses. So like I agree, get into the space that you can adapt into as many different things as possible. There are certain commonalities, like I was saying. I don't think anyone really uses baths at all. I don't really know many adults that are using baths, unless they're in a hospice with the right hoists and cares. So, you're going to more likely have a wet room. Obviously, one floor living is great, or the ability to move up into the next floor without a lift is great. But in terms of that, I would say you want somewhere that you can adapt to suit your needs, rather than planning a course that you think is going to go down and finding that specific house.
Yeah. I think you both said that you yourself said that you knew straight away the house really wasn't going to work, and then yourself said that your house did. You felt you knew it. How did you make the decision the house wasn't going to work?
Well, we lived in a 1930s detached house. And actually at the time it was just my eldest son that had been diagnosed, so we were waiting on Tom. And we just practically, it wouldn't have worked at all. It would have been a massive compromise. And I am aware that we were very lucky to be able to do that. Some people aren't. They might be in housing association or council. So it's kind of, you make do. The council will do what's reasonable and practicable. Now what's reasonable and practicable to them might not be to you. Things like the disabled facility grant will be covered like basic wall tiles. So if you want anything over and above, then you've got to pay for them. That's another tip, is a lot of kit that you buy for somebody that is disabled is VAT exempt. So it's making sure that you can just draft a letter for your builder or supplier to say, this is Thomas, he's got Duchenne, he's exempt from VAT because of the goods they're supplied for a disability. So that helps to save some money. But yeah, it just became quite obvious. I mean, we went to our MP to see if we could escape stamp duty because we knew we had to move. And actually social services wouldn't say you need to move, they just sat on the fence. So you kind of realise what space and kit that you need, and there wasn't any other alternative for us. But hand on heart, I can say it was the best decision. And actually where we moved to, my son's had a really positive experience at school and community, etc. Yeah.
And from our point of view, we'd bought the house before my older son was diagnosed, and in fact we'd been living overseas. The house was tenanted, and he was diagnosed while we lived overseas. And so actually we spoke to ND UK and the adaptations team, and they basically said, yeah, you can adapt the house, and explain how we could do it, and that's how we knew. We've talked a lot about the funding of things. It's also worth talking a bit about stuff that you can get, equipment that you might get through social services, not necessarily social services, through the occupational therapy team and physios. So both the boys have got profiling beds. They're not ours, they're NHS beds. Well, I say NHS, they're provided by community services. So make your OTs and your physiotherapists, the community ones, your best friends, because they'll be the ones who will get you stuff. And if you get good ones, they're worth their weight in gold, because you can phone them up quite often or email them, and a piece of kit will arrive a week or two later if you're as lucky as we've been with ours. And we've had the same ones for about nearly 10 years now. They're relationships worth their weight in gold if you can get a good relationship
and
going.
Kit doesn't come cheap.
No.
We're currently having a ding-dong about money over need, with Tom's been assessed for a shower toilet chair because he's had major back surgery. £6,000. Ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. But
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have to buy those pieces of equipment as...
Yeah, it's funny, we've got a really expensive shower chair, which not that expensive, a couple of £1,000. We don't actually use it because my son's far more comfortable. I bought something, it's called a Bathmobile, I think. You can't buy them in the UK at the moment. It's made in Israel of all places. They were sold here for a while. It's a shower chair, it's entirely made of plastic and completely flat packs, and I bought it to travel with. But he actually far prefers that, so he showered in this, which cost me £300. But there you go, the most expensive thing's not necessarily what you'll use. But he's got a chair which is really good for his spine, which of course he won't use. But my other son likes that. That was funded by a charity, so there are other avenues you can go to as well. That was a charity called New Life, who provide equipment for disabled children. And there are plenty of others out there as well, who either will fund it or do match funding or might give you a partial grant. We talked about power chair football earlier. I coached the Northampton team, and again, there's funding out there for equipment for things like that, which I know is not about the house, but there are ways and means. 1,000 here, 1,000 there, it adds up eventually.
One of the sites that I'd recommend is called disabilitygrants.org.uk, and within there, if you go on it, it's got grants that you can access for sports, for equipment, for housing, all sorts of things. I mean, there's probably other things out there as well, but I've often used that as my go-to. And then particularly when the children, there seems to be more funding available or grants that you can potentially access. Once you hit 18, then you kind of... so my eldest son is at university. Before he turned 18, he had a new wheelchair which cost an eye-watering £16,500, but we managed to get 10,000 from a charity called Bopperan, and then obviously we used his PIP that we'd saved up to fund the rest. So there's ways, there are things there.
In terms of finding charity grants as well, that is something that, I mean, often I am on Disability Grants, the website as well, looking for other people that would get in touch saying, you know, I'm looking for funding for this specific item, you know, my council won't fund it, and, you know, I don't have enough income to buy it, so you know where to get this, and we're more than happy to just search the internet for you sometimes, because you might have loads of other things to be doing. And yeah, like you said, there is actually quite a lot more available for children. So if you can get things done before the age of 16 or 18, great, because there's more, yeah, like New Life is quite a popular one, there's Variety as well. Also some other things like swivel seats in cars. There's a lot of places that won't fund that, but I think when someone's a child, their charitable grants are a lot more open. But then there are things for adults as well. There's a charity called Independence at Home. They provide funding for quite a large variety of things if it's related to a disability. Even stuff like, I think heating, if it's in relation to you needing more because of disability equipment, things like that. I feel like those are slightly smaller in size, unfortunately. But it's something that we're happy to look into for people as well.
And there's just another one I want to mention on that. Similarly, it's a remap. And it's a load of retired engineers that are just bored and getting told off by their wife each day, and they will come out and they can do a lot of the initial plans or the thinking behind it, or the drawing up, or even sometimes the architecture, and that can be a massive cost save that you can then take that to 4 or 5 different builders, get the quotes, and then send the quotes off to the local authority. Like Tyrone was saying earlier, with the local authority, they don't really care about the house. If they're honest, they are looking for, can we do that job for under 12 grand, tick the box, off we go. Nothing stops you getting those quotes and sending them off and saying, actually, I've had a conversation with this builder, you know, he's referred to me, or, you know, he's worked with people with disability before, X, Y, Z, send it over, and actually a lot of the time the council might compare it against something they've got, but if it's similar, they're not going to double your work. And we've had in the past, definitely people have said that's been a much better way to work. Yes, it is more legwork for yourself, but you're saving yourself the aggro of something going wrong.
Yeah.
And you're having to call up someone that the council knew 5 years ago.
Can I ask a question? When you're saying, sorry, when you're saying about future proofing, so my boys are only 5 and 6 and we're just starting the process now, so we've just had some drawings done for.
Sorry, could you speak into the microphone?
Yeah, sorry. So we're just starting the process with ours, and so we've just had some architect drawings. But when you're talking about future proofing, how do you... So, for example, in there they had put about a washing, drying toilet. Well, my 2 boys are fully ambulant at the moment, and I can't see that being a need in the near future. So, is that something that you should have put in now, or do you do it so that you have the ability to have it put in?
Well, you could have the ability, but we've got a flush dry toilet. We very rarely use it, to be fair.
Yeah.
And
all
that
it
was
is
my feeling, and that's
is a little,
£10,000 of your budget gone.
yeah, is a little control block which gets parked up on it, but it is there. But we've had issues with the shower toilet chair fitting over. But no, you don't necessarily need to do that.
And so where do you get that guidance from? Because that's kind of the OT and the architect that come up with these things.
I
And
think
how
it's,
am I meant to know?
It's from
Yeah.
people. It's
What?
sessions like this, I
Yeah,
guess.
sessions like that,
we've
yeah.
got one. It's £2,000. We never use the wash dry
Yeah.
facility on it. I always
Yeah,
wipe it
yeah.
because it's
But
easier.
then equally, I know other families that have got one installed and they wouldn't be without it, because obviously it then gives that young person the independence to go to the toilet, whereas obviously my 2, I have to help them
Yeah.
with everything, or their carers do. Things like the sink, we put the electrics in to do an up-down, and actually over the course, people have had them and said how great they are and they could put their arms on them, but actually in hindsight I wouldn't have bothered with that. The other things I wouldn't have bothered with is we've got really heavy swinging doors, and actually in hindsight I wish we'd have had recessed doors that slid into the wall.
And it's things like that
Yeah.
that are really valuable
And-
to know, because it makes the difference to the size of the room
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
accessing
Yeah.
the room.
Yes, and also, for example, ideally make sure you've got a tap outside near the front door. And you know, because I've got mats in the hall, so we do a forwards and back if we've gone out in the wet and it's muddy, because obviously they're coming into the house and then bringing everything else in, or they've gone through something. So I think you just have to look at it at a very practical level, but also thinking later on they're going to need all the assistance to get washed, showered, hoisted, changed on a plinth or on a bed. It doesn't have to be a plinth.
So I do have a little bit of knowledge around that, because my background is stroke rehab, so in
Right.
terms of caring for patients, I have that kind of knowledge. But like the thing that you said about sockets,
Yeah.
actually that, you know, what they're going to do, put 2 full sockets in unless you ask for anything more. They're not going to do that, are they? And it's little things.
But
that I
if
wouldn't
you
have
can
considered that.
list, actually this is the, well, as an OT you should know what equipment long term they're going to need. So I've already scrolled off at least 5 pieces of kit. So in the boys' bedroom, for example, as you go in the door, the wall switches are rocker switches. So not that they do them now, but they used to be able to just flick them quite easily as they went in the chair. Things like in the corner of one of Tom's room, he's got an electric desk. That's another piece of kit. So he's got sockets up above the table. So if he could have reached across, he could have done. But to be fair, we've never really used them. But you do need to kind of overkill, because if you think as well, if they start introducing the telly, the Xbox, and the entertainment things.
We've just had adaptations done. We've had chunking put in,
Yeah.
which you can get really thin,
Yeah.
which you can get funky colours,
Yeah.
so that you can add loads of sockets. You know, so we've just had that done.
Yeah.
For us, we've had a chaffing hoist put in, so all our doors, you know, all our rooms, they didn't go to the roof, so the chaffing hoist can go the whole way instead of having like single tracks and things. So instead of heavy doors, what we've gone for, which we're still waiting for, is like the cubicle doors that you get in the public changing area and things like that.
Yeah.
When you're speaking about the toilet that washes and dries, we have a bio-reading, which is like dirt cheap.
Yeah, you can do
it's
that, yeah.
compared to like the closet and that, which we know is really, really expensive.
Yeah.
And for when you know when to use it, our son different story, but he was walking, he went to school one day, his teacher slipped in and broke his leg, and he never walked from the side. And so we were constantly chasing our tail, needing to get things put in place. So I'm not saying don't do it, but like, you never know what's around
I think
the corner.
that's the point. You don't know when they're going to go off their feet. And my
I
two went off
suppose-
in the summer, in the same summer, and 2012. But the house was adapted so we could get the chair in, because you have scenarios now where wheelchair service won't provide you a wheelchair because your house isn't accessible, or you have to leave it at school. So that's why I'm saying start early, because you
And
just don't
I
know
suppose
when.
the thing about it is that because they're only 5 and 6, you feel like you're asking for too much, which
No, you're not.
Ask for more than you want,
Yeah.
more than you need,
Yeah.
and you'll
Yeah.
get the minimum.
Yeah.
I think the funding, a couple of things, because we've had a couple of house adaptations. The local authority disability adaptation team, it's their job to advise you on what you need. Another thing is, it's never too early, because particularly with the funding crisis at the moment,
Yeah.
we've been waiting a year for a roll-in shower, and there's no sign of it coming. So that, you want to be ready for it. And when we did our first adaptation, we used the MDUK adaptations handbook, and it was like the gold standard. And looking back, we spent a load of money that we didn't really have to spend. So I would say there is nothing better than talking to people who've done it, and they will tell you what they need and what they don't need. Like with Claire, we had the quite heavy swing doors, and when we saw the hinges, it was like, oh my God, this is so heavy. And actually, just a regular door is fine. And things like, all these sort of environmental controls. Well, our son just has an Alexa and a smart, a smart light bulb. It's like, Alexa, put the light on. There's loads of stuff that you can do with smart technology that will be a fraction of the price, and easily available.
I mean, the only thing I would say is you need to reinforce, make sure the ceiling's reinforced, to take a ceiling track. But having said, we can't have a H-frame because we've got 2 and they obviously share an ensuite. And we've been on holiday where the track goes round and we're like, oh, this is great. And one of the things that we did to start with on the controls, because the boys operated the controls, is they had a motor to drive it along. Don't bother with that. Just push them along. It's an
We put
It's
Harrison in it, and the best thing is
Yeah.
from one end of the room to the other and just
Yeah.
single board. It's the best thing ever. But
Yeah.
we've got the in and out.
Yeah.
That was the OT choice, and it wouldn't be something that we would have. It's a nightmare.
And can I just say something? Just picking up, I might be reading too much into this. Thank you. But there is this culture that taken from charities and taken from the local government is taken from someone else. It's not. It's not the way it's funded. It's funded by people using the money available and getting goods or services from it, and then they can take that back to the powers that be and say, look, we used 4 million in last month. That means there's £4 million worth of use. And then they go back and they try and get blood from a stone by getting 5 million. But if you're not using it, you will lose it. And if 1 month they come in and it only costs £3 million, they're not going to give that extra £1 million. They're going to go, well, you can run it off 3, so we're going to take 3. And that's how local government works, in my experience of it. And it's the same with the charities. If the charities providing the wheelchairs and all this stuff, they go off to the big corporates and they do massive fundraising, and they're saying, look at the money that we're raising, and this produces X amount of wheelchairs or X amount of ceiling hoists. And if you can add to that number, we as charities, other charities will try our hardest to make sure we can then make sure that that's repeated again and duplicated and added to. It's so British to say, oh no, I'll save it to someone else who needs it more, but that's not the case. It might seem a little bit horrible, but you have to fight for your child. and if your child needs that, your child is going to get it.
Yeah, just building on that, I think there's a stock position here when it comes to funding that the first answer you get is no, and because a lot of people go away at that point. Firstly, know what you're entitled to and be prepared to stand up for it, and that accounts not just for funding like this, it counts things like education and healthcare plans and so on, where I once was having a big argument with the local authority and realised they were quoting the wrong regulations to me because I'd actually read the right ones. Don't assume they know what they're talking about. Often they don't, often because there's not many of them and they're overworked and underpaid and sometimes just not very competent. No one's going to tell you either about things you can claim for. You need to go out and fight. So if you've got a room that's used for storage of equipment, in our case, our lift goes into a bedroom. A lift is equipment. You're entitled to a reduction in your council tax by one band. It's only 400 quid a year, but 400 quid's 400 quid. No one tells you about that. You have to go and ask for it, and then ask them to backdate it, which they will do if you ask, but they won't offer it. And it's the same with lots of other things, like charitable funding and so on. You'll only get it by asking, and you only get it by, and it's the same when it comes to PIP and so on, and DLA. Talk about it's, and as parents, your natural instinct is to talk about what your kids can do, but actually when it comes to funding, it's about what you've got to think about the worst day and what they really need on that worst day, because if they need it then, they need it, and so you do have to be prepared sometimes to not lie, not lay it on thick, but speak to when it's going to at its worst.
For us as a family, the local authority they didn't want to widen all of our doors because it wasn't seen as a necessity that our son be able to access our bedroom.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, what if he needs us when we're in the bedroom? Or why can't he go into his brother's room and play PlayStation? So they wanted to cut corners. You just need to shout a wee bit louder. You need to get your social worker to come in and say it's really important that they can be included as the family and being everywhere and not just be in their designated area. Their bedroom.
Because generally they will only do one access into the property. So we were a bit creative the second phase of the build, and we just put external access. So we put an access and a path into the garden. So yeah, you need the professional on your side, and then play the game.
It is a bit of a game at times,
And I would also say, don't necessarily accept what the council suggests, because in our first adaptation, the area on the side of the house that we were going to do the adaptation, it wasn't wide enough for the wheelchair, but the local authority were basically suggesting that they made a cupboard. Is it like the room was like a cupboard? And we said, no, we're going to have to extend a metre out. And they were quibbling about funding that. So what they suggested was completely inadequate for Isaac's needs. So know what you need and stick to that. Because otherwise you'll end up with something that may not be adequate.
When you're looking at wheelchair sizes, as it's meant to be a 150 ton circle, then they come with like, oh, that's the size of your wheelchair now. Yeah, but they get bigger, and your son maybe doesn't align, sit properly, they maybe need to tilt and that, so they need that bit more space.
And also later on, there's ventilators and stuff, and arms.
Just on our provisional drawings, they've done 150 turner circles. Is that big enough, or is that?
We had 2 turning circles in our son's bedroom, because the first one they told me he could reverse in. And I was like, well, do you walk backwards into your bedroom? And he was like, no. And I said, well, then my son's not reversing into his bedroom. He says he will go in and he will turn, and then he will turn again. So we have a turning circle at either side of the bed. But we naively agreed to our drawings, and then where they've put our back door, which is in our son's room, he has to do 7 turns to get in, to turn past his bed, to go to his bed, to turn up, because they didn't make the room straight through. They only went through a door to extend.
Yeah.
So we have extra turning points, which he's capable of doing, but it would have been so much better if they'd have just taken that extra bit of wall away and just made a straight run, so that
And
you
you-
have to go around his bed.
Yeah.
But I mean, he has
In
to go
addition to the wheelchair, you've got to factor in later on when you've got care staff or yourselves looking after, then you need space either side of the bed to move them and reposition them. So that's another factor that you need to add in. It's not just the wheelchair, it's the care space that you need. I mean, the comments I have from Tom's agency are like, oh God, it's amazing in here, because they've got the room to do the work safely, you know, because at the end of the day, you're it often, yeah.
And I would say, as a rule of thumb, you need 1.5, for the big wheelchairs, you need 1.5 times what you would need in space. You need 1.5 times what you would need if you weren't in a wheelchair. So everything's just half the size bigger. That's, yeah.
And I think that's where things like the adaptations manual comes into its own. Like I say, it's a Bible. It really, really is a Bible. Just it can be a bit dense, but just pick out the bits that you're after and have a look, and it's a great starting point.
Yeah, there are like recommendations on sizes of things or measurements. But I guess despite having like recommendations from OTs, things like that, you know your own family and your own needs. So you have to also think about it like, you know, how does this affect me, or how does this affect like their siblings, and or also just think about your child. So I spoke to somebody and they've been recommended a 3-floor lift, which is very normal to be recommended that, but the lift has to go from the bedroom straight into the living room, and they were saying that this isn't suitable for them because their child is very shy. He won't want to, you know, go from his bedroom and come downstairs and immediately be greeted by anyone in the living room or if there's people around, and they didn't want him to feel that he can't come downstairs at all because, you know, there's a visitor in the house. So it's also just kind of recognizing, you know, what does your child need, but maybe emotionally as well as physically. And it's just, there's that extra layer which can be difficult because then, you know, you're not taking up recommendations by the OT, but some of them will be very willing to have those conversations and look at other things, or just try and it might make things harder, but if you know that that's going to be better for you, then it's good to have those difficult conversations.
I'm going to be afraid to say no to OT.
No.
We've had numerous recommendations about changing table. Well, our son is contracted into basically a seating position, so there's changing table doesn't work for us. But she was like, no, you're having it. Well, I've ordered it. And I was like, well, nearly asked you to order it, like we told you we didn't want it. Well, it's sitting in the store. Well, maybe somebody else will get the better of it or send it back, yeah. And the same for a seat over the toilet. You know, I've done many posts on the Duchenne support group page, like what does everybody else use for showering, because they want to spend all this money on a seat and we don't think it's going to work. And nobody else has used the seat that we've been recommended, but we've got lots of ideas for other chairs that I've tried and tested. So I mean, even asking on support groups for what people recommend, what they use. They're the people that know, because there's people that are trying it and working with it every day, which is invaluable. OTs look at a book and think, this will work, but it's not necessarily the case all the time.
I think that's a important point. Actually, there's a lot of social media. I mean, the Duchenne family support groups, particularly good source of advice from people who have been there, done that, got the T-shirt. And,
I mean, it wasn't there when
no, same with us.
in the extent in the early days for me. So actually, what benefited me was actually going to somebody else's house who'd got Duchenne in the house and physically seen. And they made the decision not to move. So the compromise was 3-floor lift, a small bathroom downstairs, etc. So yeah, it just depends on your situation, because in this journey, if you've got a very good support network around you, whether that's friends, family, whoever, then you might decide, well, actually, I don't want to move from this community and this space, and just make the best of what we've got. Yeah.
We've just got 10 minutes left, so I just want to know, has anyone got a question different to what we've been talking about so far?
Yeah, I was just wondering about backup power. That's backup power. I was just wondering about backup power sort of.
Right.
No, you wouldn't.
Okay.
What I mean, if there's a power cut, for example.
Yeah, if it's power cut or...
So I've been exploring this because obviously I've got sons on ventilators overnight. So I've reached out to on Facebook to some of the other families. So some of them have gone back to their energy providers, and they've been fortunate and they've given them a generator. We've contacted our energy supplier to say that we're vulnerable, and then we've recently had something from the National Grid
We've had it as
to
well,
fill
a few
in,
days
and it
ago.
basically says you have to tick boxes. So on there it does put ventilator dependent or immobile or in a wheelchair. So it might be worth you finding out, Googling that, because I think it must alert them to say there's a priority list. Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Or if you're thinking of moving house, just move next to the hospital.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're on that list as well. I mean, I don't know what the situation is in Northern Ireland because it's different generating.
It's like, no, we're down in Dublin in Republic of Ireland. So.
Republic, sorry, yeah. But I would imagine there'll probably be a similar process.
Yeah, and the one of the families that I know is from the Republic of Ireland, and she's future-proofed the house, but they've done it themselves because I think they had quite a few outages anyway. So they've actually done it themselves. Yeah.
We get quite a lot of power cuts where I am, but at the moment my son, although he is ventilated at night, it's not critical if he's not able to wear it, and in fact it's usually during the day. It's been stuck upstairs once or twice, but it's not usually off for very long.
Yeah. And the other thing to do is it's worth getting the fire brigade in to do like a safety check. So they'll go around and look at fire escapes, how to get them out. Obviously then you're prioritised if there's in an event of an emergency, and they've been quite useful and kind of fitting smoke alarms and CO2 and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
That's actually a really good point. Something like fire brigade are so keen, they must do nothing all day, but the families that we spoke to, they really are keen to come out and see, because if your lads have got to shit, especially if they're struggling respiratory, they've got a lot less time at fire than someone able-bodied with a proper lung function. So it is something that they're interested in, especially if you're going to think about, some people might progress to have oxygen cylinders in their home, which is another risk on top of that. They will come round, they will carry them out, they will do a proper family fire evacuation. If you speak to someone in charge of the fire brigade, you'll aware of fire evacuation, they will do it, and they're very keen to help out. It is very good, and God forbid, you're not involved in the fire, but it is like that sometimes in that 30 seconds.
And they have a special section for people with additional needs, so that they have a proactive program to come out to people. It's not like we're asking for something extra, it's like part of their service.
Yeah.
It's a designated part of their service.
You do just have to ask for it, but as soon as you ask for it, they're there.
It'd benefit them if they knew that if they did get a call out to a certain house in an area, that there is going to be difficulties there. They're pre-prepped for that.
Pre-prepped, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And there's also other things, if there's a fire in your neighbour's house, they will probably evacuate you, just in case. But rather than before, they might send the junior around to knock on your door and say, oh, they're burning down, you can get out. That will get someone proper in, and it's all fine.
And another tip for you is for my sons to alert us during the night, we just use a doorbell, wireless doorbell. So we've got it on a lanyard strapped around the cot bed for Jack, Tom. When his brother's home from university, we can wire that one in as well, so they've got 2 different ringtones during the night, which is delightful. But it's easy, it's cheap, and it works. At the moment, it works. Yeah.
We've got Alexas in each of the rooms, which again, so they can call us during the night.
Is there anywhere I can source, is it probably this manual,
Yeah.
the perfect layout for a Duchenne room? Or an example?
Yeah.
You're talking, I'm
Yeah.
talking from absolutely nowhere. I've never even seen a
Right.
special needs bathroom, so
Right.
I'm starting from absolute
I
scratch.
can send you a photo of ours.
Yeah, anything like that. But I've
Yeah.
got all the internet and I can
Yeah.
really, I'm not finding
I
any
mean,
examples.
I mean, you don't need a huge space. So, for example, my eldest son is at university, and he's, I don't know size what, but his bedrooms is basically 2 student rooms together, and he's literally got a bit of track over his bed. And then his carers have to push him through into his wet room, and the wet room is probably just the corner here, from that border there to there.
I've heard it's 2.5
Yeah.
metres by 2.5.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not big.
So literally, it's a full wet room. It has only got a shower in. So they wheel him in, shower him, virtually dry him off in there, and then move him into the bedroom and then hoist him onto the bed and get him ready that way. So you don't need a massive amount of space, but you just have to think about, you know, where the position of that wet room is in relation to, you know, I've been to somewhere for respite and Tom would have to be wheeled from the bathroom across the corridor into the bedroom. So it just depends on the layout of your house. If it's immediately next door, then you might think, well, I don't need a changing table. I'll just put him back onto his bed and get him changed on there.
I'd say this. First of all, the MD UK handbook was like super helpful. So that is all online or through MD UK.
Yeah.
Anyone could just take my card, my details, and I'll be the one to physically post it out to you. So.
But you can also have things like, you can have a one that drops down off the wall, so that minimises the space. So there are creative ways to think about a small space. Yeah. Yeah.
And we do our changing on the drying and changing on the toilet, because he's a nightmare to turn on the bed, because we have a sleep system that has bits at either side. I don't like taking them out and then having to put them back in. So you just find a way of
You do.
what's good for you. Before we had the sleep system, we did change all the beds, but now because we have that, we dry them off as much in the shower chair, and then we put them on the toilet, and that's where we make sure he's dry, and we roll him from side to side to get him dressed and to put his clothes on the toilet. I mean, it's just what works for everybody.
I think we've got the space, it's just I want to get the layout right, the bed in the right.
Yeah. I'll come and talk to you in a minute.
I was just saying, you mentioned that you had to move, and we have 2 young boys living with Duchenne, and we know the house we're in at the moment is not suitable and to be adapted, so we have to move.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you did have building plans before you sort of bought your house, so we're just in a position, I'm just wondering, was that an architect and a builder you had involved, or we're just kind of wondering, we obviously want to get it right.
What we did was, the guy that we bought it off was lovely. We kind of explained our situation. We were fortunate in we had somebody who wasn't in a chain, and they were very understanding as well. So we explained to the owner that in order for us to buy the property, we needed to know we were going to get planning permission to do the adaptations. So he was more than patient, and he waited for us to do that. Because it took us 6 months to find a suitable property. At one point we had somebody say, why don't you buy a plot of land and start again? Well, it's like, well, where do we live then? Yeah. You know, you can't live in a caravan with 2 disabled children. I think it's, if you have to do that, it's trying to find somebody who is understanding, or at least give you a bit of flexibility, you know.
That is the challenge, like before you buy anywhere.
Yeah.
Like you have to know it's going to work for you.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like you need an architect nearly on standby.
Yeah.
And you need a builder to come in and have a look and say, right, that footprint is big enough, or it'll work with what you want.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of moving parts in it.
Outbid, because there's people that can move
quickly.
than you.
Right. Okay.
you've got to go get a new set of plans.
Yeah. You kind of need a friend that's a builder that can go in with it ahead of saying, well, yes, you could do that, and
So we have run out of time, but that's only for this street. Yeah, this stuff, these things we're talking about. The reason why it works is because we're talking together. So as bad as social media is, things like this on a Facebook group, any of that stuff from online, it's the same thing, we're just doing it virtually. So go out, speak to each other, ask people, even if they're local, can I go around? You can take your son or your daughter around and actually test drive it and see what it is, and there's nothing that stops you asking, I want exactly that room in the space that I've got. The windows are in different spaces, things like that, but that's a good place to start off with. Speak to each other, speak to ourselves, by all means, grab our details, and the more people you can speak to, the more knowledge you get, the easier this becomes. But I think what it boils down to is trust your gut. Yeah? There is no perfect way to do this. And if you did it the perfect way, you wouldn't know you've done it the perfect way because you'd be doubting all the decisions you've made along the way. So if it feels right to you, if it looks right to you, do it, because 5 to 10 years time you're the one looking at yourself in the mirror, asking yourself if you've done the right thing. And if you feel like you've made a few decisions that you wouldn't have done again, that's going to help you as much as anything else. Yeah, there is no perfect way to do this.
and it does take a huge weight off your shoulders once your home is, and I say home, not a house that looks clinical and
because that's the only thing I want to finish on. It might be a fight, might be hard, but we want a home for these lads and girls to live in, not exist in. And there's a massive difference between the two. That sometimes you'll find that, like I said, doesn't have to open all the doors. Actually, he's not confined to a room. That's a home. That's a family home. He should be able to gain access to every single bit of it. And if that's, even if that's a different part of the kitchen, or if that's a part of the garden, they have every single right to live the exact same standards that we hold for able-bodied people. And that's the fight you have to bring. It's hard, but together, I genuinely mean it's a bit corny, but together with everyone's help, and not just the people in this room, in all the rooms that Duchenne are part of, it will be possible. But it just takes a lot of work. But with that, I'd like to thank genuinely everyone for coming tonight. For everyone for sharing their experiences. Any questions you've had, we are about through today, through tomorrow for our contact details, so just get in touch and just use everyone around it. So thank you very much, everyone.